Okay, April.
Yeah.
All right, can you all hear me? Awesome. Hey, thank you everybody and welcome. I assume that people will continue to come in as it passes. It's good to see a lot of faces. Gene, I see you. Jay, haven't seen you for a long time, Jay. It's great to see you again. Dave, Arya, and there are lots of you that I can't see because you're on a different screen, but welcome to this all college meeting. And this is really interesting. It's obviously really interesting times. If you will hearken back to a series of similar meetings, some held by me, some held by the provost, some held by the budget office, and VP for finance, you will remember that last year there was, I think, a very different tenor to the meetings that we had, and frankly, they mostly revolved around the budget cuts that we had. Today, the tenor is much better. I mean, we all wish that we could be in person, at least I do, wish that we could be in person holding this meeting so that I could see you and say hi and shake your hand. And hopefully by next fall, knock on wood, we will be able to do that together. The good news is that the state of Idaho has weathered the budget crisis that has swept the country during the pandemic far better than most of our other states in our country. And that has put us in the enviable position of a flat budget. Now, in normal years, we might be saying a flat budget. Well, let's have something a little better. But I know personally, I feel very grateful that we can go in and maintain and hopefully we will ask whether we get any more is certainly an open question. I think the one fly in the ointment that these numbers that Fred is about ready to walk you through is we don't know what's going to come out of the State House with the state budget. The governor has requested that the 4.5%, 5% cuts that we went through at institutions of higher education in last spring be reinstituted, given the rather healthy state of the state's finances. I am not overly optimistic, given the tenor coming out of the legislature in Boise, that that's a realistic option. But I'm very appreciative that the governor has asked for that. And so these budget numbers are contingent upon everything staying essentially as they are, with no additional money coming to campus to speak of, but also with no cuts. And so again, compared to where we were a little more than a year ago, that's a very positive place. I will briefly turn it over to Miriam, and she's going to serve as the moderator for today's event, so we don't end up all talking over one another. And Miriam, if you'd like to say a little bit about what your role is.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. For today's meeting, we will have an opportunity to ask questions anonymously. The plan for today's meeting is that Fred Parrish, our unit business officer for CoSE, will begin with a budget presentation, followed by a short question and answer session. Next, Dean Snyder will speak to us about college priorities, which will also be followed by another short question and answer session. So when you're ready to ask questions, you can do so at any time. Please submit all questions to me through the Zoom chat feature. Both Scott and Fred will be focusing on the presentation. So please be sure to submit questions to me to ensure that your questions are answered. And again, all questions will be asked anonymously. So without any other additions to that, Scott, I'll give it back to you.
All right, thanks, Miriam. The other piece to this, everybody, is I will be coming by virtually departmental meetings over the course of the next several weeks to talk about budget and to talk about program health. So we also will talk about program health briefly today and what that process looks like. So you will have opportunities to think about what you hear today and ask questions and perhaps even more specific questions about your departments when we do that. And we will do that as more of a free-flowing dialogue than we're able to do today. So many know Fred Parrish, who is the college is fortunate enough to have as the university's budget office. Fred is just an outstanding person who understands the process and the changing process that the budget goes through. And Fred, essentially, Fred is, along with many of the staff in the dean's office, are just excellent to have around because I can keep my eyes focused on the bigger picture, and I know that Fred's going to take care of me and make sure that none of us run into financial problems. So with that, Fred, have at it.
All right. Thank you for your kind words, Scott. As some of you know, I have a number of different jobs, but my heart is in CoSE. I love working with you all. So April, are you going to share the presentation? Screen share that so that I can see where we're at. There we go. Okay, so this first slide that we're going to see will go ahead. Give us some history so we understand the context of where the university is at with its overall budget, revenue, and expense over the years. The most important item here, of course, is to see the declining budget over these years, which is noteworthy that that revenue decline is in spite of change in employee compensation, CEC, that has happened over those years, which of course is tied, that goes straight through to the faculty. So the revenue decreases that stem from our enrollment decreases are a major factor that affects our budget. And that's what we see represented here university-wide, is that decrease in revenue projection for each of the last several years. At this point, you know, if you look from 21 to 22, some of you may have just seen a video from the governor talking about a change in compensation, a raise that will increase the budget. And that's what the assumption is here, but it doesn't give us much more flexibility because that money goes straight through to the employees. So we'll move on to the next piece here, which what we saw there on that last slide was that for the coming year, as presently constituted, the budget plan budgets for a $3.7 million deficit. So what we see here are some of the tools or balancing levers that the university has considered that we have available to us to cover that gap. Most notably is a plan that I'll talk about later to split between the units and the central university, the salary savings. We expect that to cover about 2/3 of that deficit, and then additional savings of $1 million or so spread across different places. These others that are blank, there are still question marks. Are we going to see, we're not going to have a tuition increase for resident undergraduate tuition. That has been decided, but these other tuition streams, we may see some changes there. So let's go on then and talk about this next piece. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on specifically to us, but we are being asked to submit requests in spite of what we just saw telling us that there really is no extra money. We're still being asked, and I think this is wisdom, to submit proposals for strategic investment so that we can establish priorities for funding initiatives that are strategically important to the university. These will be gathered and reviewed by Leadership Council, We'll then send that on to admin council and decide which, if any, of the strategic investment priorities we want to fund this year. Go ahead. We don't need to go through this in too great detail, but this outlines the criteria that by which those strategic priorities are going to be reviewed. It really comes down to enrollment. You know, those first two, enrollment and student retention, that's the same thing. Those are two sides of the same coin, and that will be the primary consideration, with an important caveat, of course, that if there's some compliance issue, something that we have to do, well, we'll do it. And these other criteria are important as well, but they all really tie back to, I think, those three primary criteria. Next. Is the timeline. The number on here that's most important is March 5th. That's when our budget is due. Now, when it says that's when it's due, that means that's when I have to submit it to the budget office. So the various due dates that some of you have been given for what we've asked for are well before that, so that I can maybe get a little bit of sleep that week instead of spending, all of my time finalizing that, which is what I'll be doing anyway. But so there's the timeline. Go ahead. Okay, so now we get that. That was all, frankly, everything that I just went through was given to us to present, and it's important, but that's all kind of centralized information. So it's we'll spend a little more time addressing specifically our CoSE situation, as of course that's most near and dear to our hearts. What you see here is the appropriated budget for our college over the last 4 years. You see those budget increases each year, and you say, wait, we got extra money. Where did all that extra money go? Well, that's the pay raises that we received in those years. That increases our budget. We're darn glad to have it. It doesn't give us any extra money to work with, really, but it is there. Then, of course, go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, no, I'm just, April and I are fighting over who gets to mute who. The one thing that I will say is just to keep in mind, because it can get a little bit confusing, at least to me, is we are currently in fiscal year 21. We are budgeting for fiscal year 22.
Yeah, that's right. You know what? I've been at this for 10 years. I still have to sit down and think about it. When I'm going back, when I'm looking history, like FY18, now when was that? March of this year? Which year was that in? But yeah, we're in 21 now, budgeting for 22. And we can see the biggest thing here is the decrease in our budget from 20 to 21. The college took a 4.5% budget cut, around $700,000. That's a painful thing. We permanently cut some positions, but it's done now. So at least we don't have to spill any more tears over that. And we'll look here in a minute at the FY22 budget and see that it's essentially flat budget with the FY21. Go ahead, next. So that was the appropriated side. This is the local expenditures that we have. We spend about 1.1 to 1.2 million or so in local money that we generate. There's a few things here one thing in particular I really want to highlight because it is credited to the great work that you all are doing. And that second line there, that first line, revenue, that's basically class fees. Which is down because of enrollment, right? That tracks with enrollment. That second line, the F&A, that's the returned F&A that comes back in. And that trend line right there is beautiful to me. I love to see that up. That gives us more flexibility to support research in the college, which is so important.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I'm really pleased to see that number. That FY21 is the year we're in. So if you would, sort of calculate that out, it should put us ahead of last year easily. And the key to that is, don't forget, is research expenditures have been artificially depressed by the pandemic. So I'm really pleased with all the hard work that folks are doing to bring in external money. It's so important not only to getting really great science and engineering done, but it's also very important for our ability to support the infrastructure needed to grow future research.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. One of the interesting things that we see with this slide here is that for in the prior 3 years, our local expenditures exceeded our local revenues, which was not that troubling at the time because we were operating in a different type of budget environment where we were primarily focused on the fund balance. So if someone receives, we have several, one of the things that accounts for a chunk of this is we have several faculty who receive large donations to support their endeavors. If Dave gets a great big donation in one year, shows his revenue in that year. And then when he stretches out that expenditure over the next several years, the revenue is not there to offset the expenditure. So that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that over the last several years, we have spent down some of those fund balances. This is not quite the cause for alarm that it sort of looks like to see that bottom line with those negative numbers. And of course, now that we're operating a little differently, for this year, we don't see that deficit.
Yeah, and Fred, you're right. These local accounts are very important to our function as an institution, both with local accounts tied to research and local accounts tied to class fees. But the degrees of freedom in spending those are pretty small, right? You can only spend class fees on class fee stuff. The dean's office plows our share, if you will, of the F&A, the indirect cost, back into research, primarily in the form of startup. And so there's not, this is kind of the part of the budget that there's a little bit of wiggle room, but it's mostly fixed.
Yeah, that's right. Because that top line there, that revenue, like I said, that's mostly class fees. And that is tied then to its use is heavily restricted to support the classes that generated it. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is as presently constituted. This is our FY22 appropriated budget by major expense category. The obvious thing that jumps out at us when we look at this is if we take those top 3 lines, we can see that most of the budget, really, what is that, 95% almost, is tied up in labor, salaries, fringe. So yeah, $15 million, that's great. But we have a very small piece of that we actually are going to get to work with. And that's what we see here. So this just shows what Scott was saying earlier about essentially a flat budget. Now, if we go to the next slide, there's an important piece and something that I mentioned earlier that I want to spend. Where am I at? Oh gosh. I want to spend some time on this, even though I'm already pushing my limits on time here.
You're doing okay. Yeah, this is important.
Because this is a very important part of understanding the budget. So in the past, we all know that salary savings arise at various junctures throughout the course of the year. And in an academic unit such as ours, those salary savings are often pretty substantial because we have an annual hiring cycle. If a position becomes vacant, there's a high likelihood that position will be vacant for an entire year. So we always, as a college, have a pretty substantial amount of money in salary savings, vacancy savings. In the past, we have sometimes gotten to use that and sometimes not gotten to use it, and frequently not really known whether or not we were going to get to use it until the year was well advanced. The most significant improvement to our budget plan that we are rolling out right now is the manner in which we deal with budgeted salary savings.
And that this is a university-wide policy, by the way.
Yeah, correct. When I say
Right.
we, the entire university will be operating. It benefits us, frankly, more than just about anybody because of our annual hiring cycle. You know, we have positions empty for a whole year. They don't have that in facilities. A custodian leaves, boom, they hire him. What we have is savings that we know in advance are going to exist next year. If we have a faculty position, someone just told us last month they're going to retire, we already know, okay, that position is going to be empty next year. We couldn't really fill it right now, even if we wanted to, because it's too late in the game. We may fill it in the future, but next year that position is going to be vacant. I now have the authority to take those savings going into the budget year and redirect those savings on a temporary basis to whatever priority the college, whatever funding need exists in the college. So if Dr. Jones, he's retired, I'm going to have his $100,000. I can take that $100,000 and set up a budget plan for next year that uses all of that $100,000. And I know in advance that I can do it. I know that now. So we can create a spending plan for next year that's much more strategic and thought out than some of the last minute, okay, we've got all this money, let's try to spend it, that we've seen in the past. The other type of savings that emerge throughout the course of the year are what I've called here unbudgeted savings. So let's say that in now all of a sudden it's July, the budget has already been fixed for the year. In July, Dr. Jones retires. Well, now I haven't planned for that in advance. It's not part of my planned budget base. The savings that emerge from those unbudgeted changes, we're going to split 50-50 with the university. The central portion will go to offset the university's overall deficit, and our 50% will come to us to be used at our discretion. So we're developing a process whereby hopefully that will happen with relative ease, and every quarter or so, we might do it monthly. We're still working on that. We will receive our savings for that period. And so that will give us some additional flexibility. Now, within salary savings, we have temporary savings versus permanent savings. So I'll just address that real quick. If I've got a position that comes up, Dr. Jones retired in July, and he made $100,000. The half of that I'm going to have to share. That's temporary, right? For the FY22, that's going to be temporary savings. I'm going to share that with the university 50-50. But on a permanent basis, I'm going to get that $100,000 again next year permanently. It's part of my permanent salary base, and it should be there for me next year. So we can say, okay, we're not going to fill this position this year. There's some savings, but we have it to go to next year. And what that means, and this is very crucial, and we've talked about this over the years, but this new budget model will really enable something that's key, and that is that those savings, when they emerge, revert to the dean's office to be redeployed consistent with the priorities that the college has established. So a particular vacancy in a given department, both the temporary and the permanent savings are going to revert to the dean's office to be redeployed either in that current year for the temporary savings or however the college sees fit on a permanent basis. That change in the way that we're dealing with salary savings is really the biggest thing that is changing in our budget model, and a real improvement for us in terms of planning. we have some needs. So we're going to have these salary savings. What we'll do with that is first we'll set out to make sure we meet the instructional needs. Do we need to do some emergency hiring, bring in a VAP or what have you on a temporary basis to meet some instructional need? Do we have adjunct positions that we need to fill? That's going to be the first priority. We'll have a lot of startup expenditure next year with the active hiring cycle that we're in right now, and also moving expenses. We've got to get the people here. It's a very high priority for the college to try and create some GTA positions. That might even should have said GRA there, right? We want to create more graduate student support. And then what's going to happen is I got to take all of this and add it up. And there might be some extra. And even if there's not a lot of extra, when we get into next year, as those temporary savings emerge, there's likely to be some amount of additional money. And what we want to do is communicate with you. And as Scott mentioned, he'll be visiting each unit. We want to establish some funding priorities for any surplus that might exist so that we can move quickly when that occurs rather than just wait. Oh, here's the extra money. Oh, okay, now it's February. Man, we got to get right on this and spend it. And we got to go and have some big back and forth process about how we should spend that. We want to establish those priorities early so that we're ready to make best use.
We do, and thanks for that, Fred. So this is very important, and I really would like to get your input on what your departmental needs are, or what you perceive as college needs that we can start to prioritize with. Oftentimes in the past, we haven't known about this, and then come the 1st of May, we think, oh my gosh, we got to spend a bunch of money or we're going to lose it, and we have too many needs in the college to lose it. And then it becomes kind of, because we can't plan, it becomes kind of this first to the trough thing, which is not, which I don't like. So this would be money that we would accumulate and start spending in about a year from now, right? Is my ballpark guess. And so this could be, research infrastructure, it could be educational infrastructure, but it's got to be one-time money, and it will have to be spent, unless Fred tells me I'm wrong, it will have to be spent by June 30th of 2022. So we can't carry it over years. It's not permanent money. It's once and done, but it still gives us an opportunity to improve infrastructure and other things in college. So please think about that and relay them either to me or to your department chair.
Yes. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so that's the appropriate. Now on the local side, we're doing something different now, and many of you have been involved in this already. In the past, we haven't been especially focused on budgeting our local accounts because we just used a fund balance approach. If you had the money in your account, you could spend it. Well, there's some issues with that, and I won't spend too much time on explaining all the rationale, but it creates some real havoc with the financial statements and trying to understand what's really going on inside the university. So what we're asking now is to go ahead in our local funds and project what we anticipate our revenue and expenditure to be in a given year. That projection will then create your budget. Your spending authority then is the budget. If you thought you were going to spend $2,000 and we gave you a $2,000 budget, that's your spending authority. Now, if you look at that and say, well, yeah, but I actually have $10,000 in my local account. Great. No one is taking that $10,000 away from you. We just want you to tell us how much of that you think you're going to spend next year. If you think you're going to spend more than you're going to bring in next year, that's probably fine too. What you're doing then is using your fund balance. You're essentially spending down the university's reserves. And we can do that. We can allow for the use of fund balance. The key to remember here is that we're retaining that fund balance. Whatever money we have in local accounts, we're retaining that, but we're setting a little bit of a yield sign there where you are going to submit a budget and your budget authority is constrained by the approved budget. If you want to exceed that, then we'll dip into your fund balance in order to do it. And I'll have to submit a budget request in order to get that. If you've got questions about this part of things, please reach out to me. I can, for those of you who think you might be impacted by this, I can talk in some length about.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize that this is not something that we dreamed up in the dean's office. This is coming down from on high and is a university-wide policy.
And there really are some good reasons for it that I can go into for those who are interested if you want to chat about it. Okay, go ahead. Oh, wait.
Go back up to the previous
slide. We skipped a slide there, April.
Okay, so I'm going to take over now, and thank you, Fred. I thought that was really good. I want to make certain you all know where we're going. As Fred mentioned, everybody on campus, every unit on campus has the opportunity to submit a strategic investment request. And frankly, enrollment is going to drive virtually all of the successful requests, if there are any successful requests. And there may not be money to have any successful requests. We don't know right now. That a lot of what happens in Boise with the budget is going to determine that. But I asked for a similar investment last year and got nothing of it. And I certainly don't anticipate that we would receive all of this year. But this is, as much as anything, putting markers down for the college about things that I think, and many of you agree, need to happen to boost enrollment, to make our overall program stronger. And the big thing is, and this is identical to last year, is bringing in 5 computer science faculty. That $1 million includes fringe. So the notion with that, and that's all frankly enrollment driven on the surface. However, I've spoken with many of you, and the other thing that comes across is many of you would like to see a stronger computer science presence on campus, because it will very much directly benefit your research through collaboration. And so that's in the back of my mind, but as a selling point, this is really an enrollment thing. Startup, $1.5 million, again, if we were to get all of this at once, that would be one-time money. Salaries are obviously recurring. And then we've got a real problem with a dearth of academic advising in the college. And I think when we go back to that enrollment part, the retention aspect of that is really being hurt, because all of the faculty out there are being asked to take on a very heavy load of advising a lot of students. And minimally, what I'd like to do is get enough professional advisors spread across the college that were at least field specific. So I can see there being an advisor for engineering, for example, that would advise first and second year students and get them in the right trajectory. Because I think all of us share some concerns we've had in the past with central advising, pointing our students in what we would consider to be the wrong direction, and a direction that doesn't benefit the students, most importantly. So those are the requests. It's hard to put numbers on the retention part of the academic advisor bit, but we can put some numbers on the computer science, and I'm going to be very brief about this next April. So if you will look at these numbers, and again, I will be brief about it, but we're going to post all this stuff on the website, and it'll come out in the newsletter tomorrow as well. So you'll be able to review this at your leisure, should you choose. What you will see here is, if you look at some of our peer institutions in the region, and then Omaha, which of course is where I came from, so I'm very familiar with it. What you will see is that ISU is in that group of peer institutions, I mean, really, really below everybody else in the number of tenure track faculty that we have in computer science. And that's a big big increase from when I took over as dean, when we had 1 person in computer science. And so this is a challenge. We're working to solve that challenge. We're doing some more computer science hiring this year, but we need more. If you look at these other peer institutions, you'll see that it's not necessarily linear, that the more faculty you have, the more majors you have. But what you do see is as you develop more faculty, you get considerably more majors. I put the number of degree programs because the nature of computer science is oftentimes you'll find computer science programs in engineering colleges, and there are multiple degree programs within the computer science overarching program. And so I put that there because, like in Omaha, there's 5 different degree programs. There's 18 tenure track computer science faculty in the Department of Computer Science, but many of those folks teach in other related degree programs that don't get coded at the national level in the IPEDS data as computer science. So these statistics are a little bit wishy-washy, which is why I've got a good colleague and friend, Joanne Leidy, who's the Dean of Engineering at Boise State. And that's the example next April that I really want to delve into a little bit. And again, I won't spend a lot more of your time on this part, but what I want you to look at is in 2012, they had 380 total students in computer science at BSU. They have added 15 tenure track faculty since that time and are now up to 600 to 700 computer science students. The degrees conferred very much track with that trend. They only have 1 major at Boise State in computer science, so it's not this diffuse thing. And there are many things which I've alluded to before, but this gives us a model right here in our home state that suggests that if we beef up the number of faculty in computer science, the direct impact on undergraduate and graduate enrollment will be significant. And the reason that I'm looking very hard at computer science is I would like to grow many of our programs, right? And add faculty to many of our programs. But if I'm looking at selling this up the food chain, this is the biggest, literally the biggest bang for the buck. All right. So that just gives you some context as to why I'm asking in this budget request that Fred will put together for additional strategic funding. Do I think in a million years I'll get 5 new lines next year? No. But do I think if I keep being the squeaky wheel, we might eventually get there? Yeah, I hope so anyway. All right, next April. Okay, this is the time if you have any for questions. So Miriam, I'll turn it over to you.
So I actually don't have any questions submitted yet. And so again, we've
Okay.
got a few minutes if someone wants to try and submit a question, but we're also
Well, here's
able
my
to move forward.
suggestion. If we don't see any coming in, feel free to ask, right? I mean, that's I don't mean this to be, you know, the Fred and Scott show, right? I do want to entertain questions. So think about it. If you have questions that pop into your mind as I go through the next part of this, please ask. We'll have another question session after this next 5 or 10 minutes or so. Okay. All right, next April. Okay, so the budget stuff is perhaps, at least from my perspective this year, a whole hell of a lot more fun than program health is, right? And I want to point some things out. This is one of the, I've never seen, frankly, a process like this before in my life. And I want to point out that this is a state board of education dictated process. We didn't sit around here at ISU or certainly in the college and hatch this up. And I've talked to the chairs since this has come up, and I'd like to kind of share some of my thoughts on this. We all can get better, and we all can get better as programs, right? And how we get better means talking about what some of our weaknesses are, as well as some of our strengths, our opportunities that lie out there, as well as some of the things that threaten those opportunities. And so there is no way when you are forced, as I have been forced, to put programs into quintiles and rank sort them, that anybody's going to emerge, including yours truly, as particularly happy with it. Because as scientists, mathematicians, and engineers, we all know that what this is essentially doing is taking a somewhat subjective process, right, and turning it into an objective process of taking something with a non-parametric distribution and sticking it into quintiles that nominally have a parametric distribution. So there's all sorts of issues with this. And so what I encourage you to think of is not that anybody's getting beat up on, but instead that this is a way for all of us to look at ourselves and say, how do we increase that document that Miriam and April put together that I sent out last week, that looked at all the different, it's just kind of a pamphlet, a flyer for that give an overview of the college, demonstrated that all of our programs have had enrollment challenges, right? As Fred mentioned earlier, that's what drives revenue in our system. And so we all need to think, as part of our overall program health, what can we do to increase undergraduate and graduate enrollment? So that's just one example. I got the input from the departments, and then over the holiday break, I went back and looked through those. I looked at the enrollment numbers, research numbers, and came up, admittedly, all right, with qualitative scores, with quantitative scores that were derived qualitatively. All right, and so next, please, April. What we arrive at, and this just, I don't like it any better than a lot of you don't like it, right? What we arrive at is this big table of all the degree programs in the college. The ones in, and these are rank ordered. And again, I would encourage you not to parse the numbers too much, because this is an inherently subjective process on all of our parts. But what I would ask you to look at, some of the lowest ranking programs are programs that have essentially nil or very, very low enrollment. Then we move up to programs who largely suffer from enrollment challenges, and most of them, not all of them, but most of them are at the graduate level, right? And to me, this points to a challenge that we have across our graduate programs at ISU, is that they are woefully underfunded, right? I mean, the number of GTAs that we have in the college has dropped in the time that I've been here at ISU. And I know before I got here a little less than 3 years ago, it had dropped prior to that. So we are suffering in our graduate programs from a lack of support. Some departments have suffered from some personnel flux, which has caused, I would argue that our engineering programs are still suffering reputationally. I don't think legitimately, but nonetheless, perception becomes reality, that they are suffering reputationally from the unanticipated and unsupported influx of international students that came in several years ago. And that, I call it a hangover. I don't think that hangover has left many of our engineering programs. And that's not any reflection on the human beings that make up those departments and programs, okay? It is an externality that came in and was very, very disruptive and very, very under-resourced. So you can look through, and again, I don't want to get too hung up about who's above who. Biology trends up there at the top at the undergraduate level because it's got a whole bunch of students and does a whole bunch of service, right? I mean, there's just all kinds of service. Biology at the graduate level isn't in the bottom 2 quintiles, but it bumps up again this, and Janet and I have talked about this, and my biological sciences colleagues, we will talk about that. The enrollments in the biological sciences graduate programs for the number of faculty in the department is not all that high when you kind of ground truth it to what else is happening in the college. So again, it's not to beat anybody up, it's to cause some self-reflection, and it's mandated. If I think in some ways doing this kind of self-reflection is important for all of us. I think this mechanism and this artificial ranking thing is more divisive than it is inclusive, and more harmful than it is useful. But I do think the overall process has some redeeming factors to it. Next, please. Okay, this is what's coming up. So we've kind of looked at what's gone thus far. I will be coming around to all your departments virtually, unfortunately, and chatting with you specifically about program health. We can also throw a budget in there. And I want to provide you with my feedback. And I want to listen to your constructive criticism of that feedback and the questions that you might have for me. Now, those programs in yellow are in the bottom 2 quintiles, and per SBOE policy, we have to develop what are called action plans for that, for those programs. And those have to be done in conjunction with the dean. Now, those don't have to be done and due to academic affairs until late spring, but we will develop a timeline in the dean's office that probably gets them on my desk by the end of March, just so we have, maybe earlier than that, just so we have time to go back and forth over them. All programs. Now, this is the key, because I think this has the potential to be divisive and to appear punitive, and I don't want it to. So in an attempt to bring out what I think are the benefits of this process, I am asking all degree programs in the College of Science and Engineering to develop an action plan regardless of what quintile you're in, all right? Because as I mentioned, there are things that we all can be doing better to improve enrollment, to increase research productivity. There's lots of different things that we can be doing. Before we go to this next slide, I also want to emphasize, except for some of those programs that literally have had no enrollment over the years, I am not going to advocate for or consider elimination of any of this, right? But unless we don't come up with action plans that are reasonable and doable in a 3-year period. So this is not an attempt to get rid of stuff. It's meant as an attempt to have all of us, every program in the college, ask hard questions about how can we do things better. Next, please. Okay, this is directly from Academic Affairs. This is not my verbiage. The programs on this list, and by this list they mean in the bottom 2 quintiles, which were the ones in yellow above, recommend more than one of the following actions. An improvement plan. How are we going to get better? To me, an improvement plan means how are we going to increase our enrollment? Recruiting is really challenging for us, and I know that. We've got a limited budget, and frankly, we don't yet have a cohesive enrollment management plan on the campus. So getting new students in is a little bit challenging for us. And I won't say beyond our control, but it's a dial that is harder for us to turn. What we can control is retention, and hence the advisors in that previous slide that I'll be asking for. What do we need to do to increase our enrollment? What do we need to do to increase the quality of instruction where we collectively think that that's an issue? How do we make that all happen? And I think that's certainly part of it. Consolidation, I don't know that the only consolidation that I will still want to consider when we get back together in the fall is taking a very long and very hard look at the role of or the organization of the college. And I think we have, as I've mentioned to you before, I think we have a lot of very small departments that maybe would be better served if we were to consolidate not the disciplines, but the administrative functions of the departments. That goes along with restructure. It's all, to me, all kind of part and parcel. Investment is huge. I mean, we have to be realistic, but one of the things for those graduate programs in the bottom 2 quintiles that I think we need to consider is how we invest in those to be able to support more students, because it ain't going to come free. Now, we're not even going to program elimination, but the other thing I'll say is in a lot of departments, and I want to leave time for questions, in a lot of departments, we're doing a lot of hiring and have been over some time. That, with the proper expectations of the new colleagues that are coming into the college, is going to turn those programs around almost in and of itself, right? We don't want to just rest on that. But some of you, and I've talked to all of the chairs about this. Most of you all have a really good idea. Most of your departments have a really good idea about what needs to happen to make us better. So I don't think this is going to be a huge onerous process. I feel like in my time as dean, we've spent a lot of time at the department level talking about this. Okay, and this has to happen over 3 years. So we'll talk more about that. Okay, Miriam, I will stop and turn it back over to you.
Okay, so we have received several questions actually, so we'll just start working through them and get as far as we can. And they are from a broad range of topics.
And Miriam, Fred and I went a little longer, so we can go a bit over if we need to. I'd like to make sure we're respectful of answering the questions.
Okay, all right. The first question is, will CoSE advocate for faculty and staff to receive vaccinations?
Absolutely. Don't forget, those of you who don't know, I'm a parasite guy, but I'm an infectious disease guy by training, right? And I have been, and I share this relatively publicly, I have been appalled at the national level since the pandemic began about our nation's response to this. I think we have people now who in leadership positions in the nation who better understand the importance of public health and the severity of this pandemic. And so I have confidence that we will turn some of that around. Some of it's unfortunately become politicized, and I hope and pray to the extent that I do that the vaccine does not become politicized, because we got real problems if it does. I would love nothing more than to see every single faculty, staff, and student at Idaho State University vaccinated by the time we start up in the fall. Do I have any guarantees that that will happen? I frankly think we're going to have to wait collectively a little bit longer to see what comes out of Washington with the Biden administration's plan for vaccine distribution. However, I saw this in the faculty senate minutes the other day. I will very much advocate for working at the state level to make certain that all of our faculty at ISU and staff are eligible for vaccination.
Thank you. All right, the next question. Was a portion of the FNA research indirects increased in the last couple of years due to a change in formula for indirect allocation, or does it reflect increasing grant awards?
Yeah, great. That's a super question. I'm really glad that came up. Thanks for asking it, whoever did. It's the latter, right? It's an increase in awards. Fred and I are really optimistic, frankly, because we've got a trend in the number of submissions and awards that over the last 3 years has gone up pretty dramatically. And so I'm very encouraged about where we're going with overall research productivity. The distribution formula is a stickier wicket and is, from a university perspective, being talked about with amongst the deans, but in the Glenn Nelson and the VP for finance in his office about what that looks like. Fred understands FNA as well as anybody does on campus. And Glenn understands it really well. And of course, I've got a really good handle on it as well, given my past. But I think we will see a shift in the model, how much more money that brings in. The other thing that counterbalances that is we've got a new negotiation with the feds. We have to renegotiate that rate periodically. When the RISE Center went away, we lost a lot of space that we could classify as research. We all share a concern that decrease in the amount of classified research space that is classified as research space is going to decrease our rate. So there's still some unknowns, but the big news is the trend in awards is way up.
Okay. The next question. I know the university was looking directly at investing and creating study/congregating areas for students. Lack of group study areas for students in our department has been a point of discussion. Is there an update on the progress of these efforts?
Miriam, could you give a slight update on where we at? But Miriam was really involved over the summer with this, and I think it got put on hold. And I honestly don't quite remember where we're at, Miriam.
So it is pretty slow right now. One of the biggest hangups, and this is really interesting, COVID has actually slowed down the furniture production in the country. And so they're having a hard time getting the materials and supplies that they want to use for these projects. So I haven't had an update for a while. The last update I had, that's what I was told.
Great, thanks.
The next question, what has been the general impact of COVID on enrollments across CoSE departments this year? And do we have reason yet to hope for those numbers to rebound?
You know, much like the university, we are down a little bit, but not nearly as much as what people feared. And the challenge we've got is teasing apart the causes, right? Because if you haven't looked at the document that we sent around out of the dean's office last week, I encourage you to do so. It's also on the website. And Miriam, go ahead and put a link to that in the newsletter that comes out tomorrow, would you please? Our enrollment continues to go down essentially across all departments except for computer science, right? So how much of this year's decrease, which isn't huge, is due to just a continuation of that trend, and how much is due to COVID, we're not really sure. I welcome, on that note though, I welcome ideas from all of you for ways that we can more successfully recruit students. And we certainly don't have a lot of money to do it, but maybe one of the answers is, when we're thinking about budget, you say, Scott and Fred, you really ought to be thinking about some strategic recruitment investments. Because although the university is going to come out with a plan and is actively working on it, we're not there yet. And I'm not very good at just waiting. So I wouldn't mind having some ideas that may be idiosyncratic to our particular disciplines.
All right, next question. What can we do to increase female and underrepresented enrollment in engineering?
Yes, well, this goes back to that recruitment plan, right? This goes back to finding the resources to invest in more K-12 outreach. I have this idea that remains in my head of STEM community chairs. And a STEM community chair in an ideal, in Scott Snyder's somewhat ideal world, would be a discipline-specific faculty member in all of our departments, all right, that would have significant expectations to work with and develop programs for K-12 education in the region, all right? And I saw this work at my previous institution like gangbusters. Enrollment, and especially diverse enrollment, went up. We saw a lot more summer camps that were focused at young women in particular. Now, the challenge that we have with stuff like that is the state of Idaho, in its infinite wisdom, has said that we can't have summer camps or any other camps any time of the year that are gender specific, all right? So I can't have a camp for young women in electrical engineering because it's forbidden by state statute somehow. So the challenge that creates with us is there's a whole bunch of data that demonstrate that young women, especially as they're getting exposed to the STEM fields, learn better and are more receptive when they are in single gender environments. So I would like nothing more to do it. So that becomes a challenge, but it's not an excuse, right? We need to do a better job reaching out into K-12. These STEM community chairs are one way to do it, but we've got to get resourced for it. The other way to do it, frankly, is to hire more women faculty, period. And I will point to biological sciences that over the course of my tenure at ISU has done an excellent job at increasing diversity and has done it proactively. And you see a very different composition of the faculty in biological sciences than you did even when I came 3 short years ago. So I would like to see that. I've encouraged our, I've insisted, frankly, that all of our active search committees work to include women and other underrepresented groups in the STEM field in their candidate pools to make sure that we're getting a crack at recruiting top-notch underrepresented folks.
So I have 2 more questions. Should I go ahead and ask those for you?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So the next one is there support for phased retirement and or reduced workload in exchange for salary savings? If so, how should each be pursued?
I love that question because it allows us to create a happier, more inclusive, more humane workplace, right? And the key is we have done this again during my tenure on a very ad hoc basis. And there's somebody on my screen who I won't mention who is the beneficiary of one of those ad hoc situations. And I like the idea, but Fred and I have talked, and HR is supportive of it. Fred and I have talked about this pretty extensively. What this budget, what this salary savings business that he was talking about allows us to do is to expand that possibility, right? Because we know we're going to keep the savings. If somebody goes down to half-time for a couple of years, we know we're going to recoup that savings, and then we can start to plan how to fill the holes. So again, the curricular holes in the department have to be covered under any sort of phased retirement plan that we come up with. And it still will be a one-on-one conversation, a 2-on-1 with the department chair, the interested faculty member, and myself. And then I'll pull Fred in at the appropriate time. But it gives us the opportunity to do this because now we can plan for these vacant positions. The only thing I ask, and those of you who have worked with me to do this, the few of you that have, know that I have to have a fixed endpoint that is committed to by the faculty member. It can't be something that keeps getting pushed out because we do need to be able to plan for the continuity of education for our students. So happy to talk to anybody about that. Fred?
I'll just say on that, if you're going to do it, the sooner you do it, the better. Because once we move, I almost wanted to say when I was giving the presentation, hey, what I mean to say to you when I talk about budgeted versus unbudgeted is if you're going to retire, do it now. Because then, or at least tell us now, because then I can take all of that savings as part of our budgeted savings, and I can redirect all of those savings somewhere else in the college. If it happens after March 5th or so, when everything's get finalized, then we move into that unbudgeted savings, and we'll keep all of it permanently. We'll only get half of the savings next year. So we're not trying to push anybody out the door. We love you all. Have a great career, but when you think it's over, the sooner we know, the better off everyone's going to be.
Great question.
All right, and this is the last question. Could you give an example of how the new computer science positions could be integrated into other departmental programs in CoSE to create interdisciplinary degrees, cross-listed courses, and collaboration?
Absolutely. I will pick on my own discipline just because I'm most familiar with it. So somebody in CS that we brought in as a bioinformatics person, right, but had a very computational background, would be an ideal sort of nucleating agent for working in biology. A lot of the new biologists that we're bringing in have, they're more into, or part of their research, let me put it that way, part of that research includes DNA sequencing or some sort of omics, genomics, proteomics, the whole bit, which are highly computational areas. So that would help the success, certainly in the engineering fields. I mean, there's all sorts of, so somebody in computer science, for example, that did modeling and simulation, or a couple of people in CS that did modeling and simulation, right? There is almost no discipline in the college that they couldn't collaborate with, but certainly in engineering, helping to work on the modeling and simulation of a new nuclear power plant design, which some of our nuclear engineers do, or various exercises in electrical engineering. So again, I don't think there's and then just folks that deal with data, right, who are real data analytics folks. It's almost data independent because these days all disciplines collect such massive amounts of data. that in order to tease the signal from the noise, you have to have really good computation and often novel computational techniques. So that would be from the research perspective, but I think you can see how that would spread out and allow for some really innovative courses to be taught in the same sorts of disciplines that would make for super competitive students.
Okay, that was the last question. So I'll hand it back to you, Scott, for final remarks.
Well, hey, thank you all again for you don't know, it makes me honestly a little bit emotional. I am so appreciative of the hard work that you all have done over the last year. This has been something we never thought we'd see, and now we're living through it. And I think we're serving our students and ourselves with great creativity and great aplomb. And so thank you for all your hard work. You don't know how much that I hope that we can do this in the fall and do it in person. So until I see you at your department meetings or in some other setting, enjoy and be well. Bye, everybody.